Hi everyone, this is Dr. Essie Stacey, helping you to be well. Welcome everyone, welcome to the Why Am I Sick webinar. Over the years I have noticed that helping people to get well can be done in a few simple steps, and I wanted to begin to teach you those steps. I'm into education, I like education, and what I've realized, I home educate my kids, and I like to make complicated things simple. And what I've noticed is that, we go to school, our kids go, well, mine don't, but kids go to school, learn over a number of years how to do maths, how to do English, how to do biology, but no one teaches us how to do health. And my friend Yasuko, who's Japanese and grew up in the mountains in Japan, she said from kindergarten age, the children are taught about health. And I just got thinking that that's what we need to do. We need to be taught health. And that's what I want to do for you, is to take you on a journey so that you understand your health. So that you don't think, okay, my elbow's hurting, I need to go and get elbow medicine. My stomach's hurting, I need to go and get stomach medicine. Even if we're into herbal things, we still think, I've got head problems, I need a herb for my head. So that the herb is a substitute for the drug. And I take a different approach to that. So it's called a hierarchy of health, wheels within wheels, helps you to understand the cascades that happen before we get to ill health. And if you can begin to understand these, and they're not difficult, it's just a different way of thinking about health. If you can get to start thinking about and understanding these wheels, then whatever you want to call your illness, you'll know where to start, and you'll know where to look in terms of understanding what has caused the issues. And so I've got some pre-recorded video into two parts. The first part is to bring us all up to speed. Many people will have heard bits and pieces of part one, but stay with it, because I want to build us so that we're all starting at the same point. And then the second part, I speak more specifically about the hierarchy of health. But what I want to do first of all, before we get to that bit, is to just to look through the ways in which we've been taught about health. So just bear with me whilst I bring the slides up. So at medical school, I was taught that our body's a bit like a car. I didn't use those terms, but like a machine that, okay, if the steering wheel's gone, you could take it to the mechanic and you get steering wheel medicine. If there's smoke coming out of the exhaust, then you take it to the mechanic and get exhaust medicine. If something falls off, you take it to the surgeon and get it put back on again. Very much we were taught like that, systems. So we talked about the engine, you talked about the electronics in the starting mechanism, etc. We talked about different systems of the body. And it's not wrong to do that. We do need to understand how the liver works and how the gut works and how the ankle works and how the brain works. We need to understand all of those things, but they all are connected. And in our world right now, we are becoming, as medics, more and more specialised. We're looking at a smaller and smaller field, and we're not taking the bigger picture into consideration. And, these guys don't look like cars to me. They don't even remotely look like cars. And these are my family who I've had to learn another way of thinking about health through, because their issues did not fit in neatly into a car thing. I've got Luke on the right, who had a weird chronic fatigue. Harry had ADHD, he had a bloated tummy, he had perforated eardrums, he had gut issues. And Hannah was born with Down syndrome. And so I had to come up with alternative ways of thinking about health, because if you look at one little system, it didn't help my children. And here's a picture of Hannah and Zach when they were tiny. And if you look really closely, you'll see they both got rosy cheeks, rosy red cheeks, runny noses, and Hannah particularly looks tired. If we're looking at their tummies, you'd see they have bloated tummies too. And what I was interested in when they were little was why they all looked like this. And what I realised was that the red cheeks, which is actually called rosacea, wasn't because of the cold outside. Once you began to heal the gut, the rosy cheeks went away. The runny nose went away. The tired eyes went away. The brain woke up. So I started thinking, let me go back to Down syndrome with these slides. Down syndrome is not like a car. It's like everything goes wrong. Growth, runny nose, red cheeks, bloated tummy, brain, learning, vitamins and minerals are low. Thyroid doesn't work. They can get leukemias. So the search went from car to something that encompasses the whole body, which is actually the gut. The gut is an immune organ. It's an immune organ like a liver. It's not just a place where we digest food. And the gut drives the immune cells, it drives inflammation, it drives health or disease. So this is where I started. I started at the gut. And what I want to do now is just to take you through the gut side of things, first of all, because that's where we start. We start with the gut. We start with understanding the gut, but also looking a little bit about genetics as well, because the gut and genetics go together. So let's look at this.
So what role does the gut and genetics play in making us ill or keeping us well? Let's look at the gut first of all. Now, I know that this slide is very familiar to some of you, but for others it will be the first time that you are coming to this concept perhaps. So let's look at the top side, dysbiosis. So bio is bugs and a dys is a disarrangement in the bugs. So if there's a gut dysbiosis, there's an imbalance or derangement in the gut microbes. And my little diagrams here, green is supposed to be for good microbes and the red for the bad microbes, so-called, because in fact it's not as simple as that, but we'll keep it at that for now. So a happy gut is where the gut lining cells are happy and packed closely together with no gaps. So I'm talking about mainly the colon, the large intestine, and so these cells here, these happy faces are cells, they're the gut lining cells. And there's one single layer of cells that separate the lumen, the inside of our gut, with the inside of our bodies. Now you also have things like mucus, a couple of layers of mucus on top, like that, but it is a single layer of cells separating you from the environment, your internal environment. And a happy gut is one where these cells are happy and there's no gaps. There's no gaps here. So that's a happy gut. In an unhappy gut, you have more of the bad microbes than the good. And that is a situation which you might have heard of called leaky gut. And there you're seeing there's gaps in between those gut epithelial lining cells. And those gaps let stuff come through. And I'll talk about the stuff in a second. When the stuff comes through, you get activation of your green things. And most of you know that I call these ninja peas because they look like peas and it's easier for you to remember them. And those ninja peas are actually called immune cells, or macrophages is one of the most common types. The macrophages, the immune cells. So when stuff comes through, foreign material comes through, the immune cells are activated. They're told that there's an alien on board. So I've just cleared the screen so we've got a bit more space. So the ninja peas attack the alien substances. And these alien substances can be anything that's big enough to get through those gaps. So that can be gluten. It can be bits of milk. It can be bits of perfume. It can be pesticides. It can be heavy metals. You name it. If the holes are big enough, it will go through. Yeah, it can be virus. And so the stuff comes through and the ninja pea is activated, and it's the ninja pea that is responsible for giving us the symptoms of illness. So if it's a virus or anything else for that matter, then the things like shivering and runny nose, aches and pains, they're coming because of the reaction that the ninja pea does. And that reaction is linked to inflammation. That's an inflammatory response. So the gut dysbiosis, together with the ninja pea, creates the inflammation. And it's inflammation that is the big cause of illness. It's inflammation that makes us ill. And so it kind of doesn't matter what disease you're talking about, inflammation creates disease. Chronic inflammation that's going on and on and on. It might be at a low level, so the pesticides that are coming in may be at a very low level and not enough to create so many symptoms like a virus might, a full-on virus attack, but it doesn't mean that the inflammation isn't there and you have this silent, what's called low-grade inflammation going on for years and years, decades before finally the body said, I can't cope. And so it doesn't matter what the illness is. I deal with people with aches and pains, fatigue, aches and pains, like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. So it could be that. It could be a problem with the ninja pea itself. It could be that inflammation, the macrophages deal with inflammation, they deal with infection, they deal with tumours. Yeah, so it could be a problem with the macrophage itself. Could be a problem with sugar metabolism or obesity. So you think of being overweight or diabetes. Think of metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome where you get polycystic ovaries. You might have high blood pressure, cholesterol, all within this kind of paradigm created by inflammation and this gut dysbiosis. It might be in the head. It might be your mood. It might be Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, brain fog, forgetting your words. All to do with inflammation. And so what is this axis of interaction between you and the microbes? So there's you shining brightly in the universe, and there you have your gut microbes existing happily in your gut. And that interaction between the gut microbes and you is called epigenetics. So there's at least 10 times more genetic material in the gut than we have in our own genes. At least 10 times more, possibly more. And it means, you might think, well, so what? But actually what that means is that their genes are able, through this epigenetic switch, to affect our genes. Epigenetics is a switch. You can switch genes on you can switch them off. You may have the genes for diabetes, but it doesn't mean to say you're going to get it. That gene needs to be switched on. And if you've got good things happening in your gut and not creating so much inflammation, then that could switch that gene off. If you've got bad things happening in your gut, creating inflammation, it will switch that gene on. So it's important for us to understand this interaction between what's happening in our gut and us. So we are affected by what is living in us, of course. And so the next question is, what makes the gut microbes well and what makes them sick? Well, there are different influences on the gut microbes. There's toxins, which we'll come to. There's sugars. Most of us know that refined sugars are not good for us. But one of the reasons they're not good for us is because they harm the gut microbes, or rather they stimulate the growth of the bad microbes. They'll stimulate growth of things like bad yeast, like Candida. Not all yeasts are bad, but Candida albicans, that's the one, the thrush, that will be stimulated with sugars. Similarly, with juicing, creating all these sugars, you may well be stimulating the growth of bad microbes. What else? Nutrients. So the gut needs nutrients. The gut microbes need nutrients. And so if you don't feed them the right nutrients, if you feed them, for example, fats, the bad types of fat, trans fats, etc., that will ruin them. What else? Exercise. Exercise is good in moderation, and moderation means for you the exercise that makes you feel good, maybe slightly out of breath, but no more than that. Exhaustive exercise that the elite athletes do, that whacks you out for weeks, that will damage the gut microbes. So everyone's levels are different. My exhaustive exercise may be your easy exercise, and vice versa. And then here, electromagnetic frequency that comes off phones and mobile phone masks, etc., has been shown to affect the gut microbes. I'm not making it up. I'm not pulling it out of the air. I'm not talking about that in depth today, but there are studies that show that electromagnetic frequency will affect the gut microbes. So, what next? Our thoughts. Let's get rid of some of those. Our thoughts, there's a gut-brain axis, which is known to exist. And we know that when we're nervous, we want to run to the toilet. That is the gut-brain axis in its simplest form. But it is our thoughts do determine the level of inflammation, do determine what happens with our gut. Good. But what about our genes? Do our genes represent our destiny? Can we dictate how long we're going to live based on our genes? Well, the Human Genome Project was launched in 1990 at the cost of $3 billion. And they were expecting to find 100,000 genes. What did they find? They found 23,000 human genes. That was it. Yep, 23,000. They thought they were going to find loads and loads, and they didn't find very many. Now, the interesting thing about this is not that we just have 23,000 genes, but the fruit fly has 17,000. And rice, yes, these non-living things, has more genes than we do. How on earth do you explain that? It's almost inexplicable. So basically, what they showed was genes, yes, genes can predict disease, but it doesn't explain everything that goes on. And we've known this for a while, and we've just said, oh, it's environment, and left it at that. But recently, it was suggested in a paper that disease can only be put down to 5% of our genes. So when we're trying to describe what makes us ill, genetics is only worth 5% of that. So that's in itself is pretty major. So then we have to think of, well, hang on, we haven't got that many genes. Fruit flies have the similar numbers of genes to ours. But so what makes us sick then? What determines our sickness? Well, I think it's not to discard the DNA, but this is becoming more and more important in science and in our lives. So imagine this is you again, and this is your DNA in the middle, and the DNA doesn't exist floating in the air in your cell. It exists in the water in the cell, and we know that this water in the cell is highly structured. It's not like the sea or when you run a bath and it's just swilling around and the DNA is just floating around in it. This is like a matrix, a highly organized matrix. And I was at the water conference in Germany last year, and they had some of the greatest names in water research. And most of the water research deals with the quantum physics. And Luc Montagnier, who had discovered the HIV virus and then became fascinated with water, said this. He said, water is part of our DNA structure. To transmit information, you need water. We need the water. And so it might be better to look at this diagram in terms of all of this stuff on the right, the toxins and all the things that affect the gut microbes. They can have a direct effect on the DNA. We know that because we can do DNA adduct tests and see that toxins are stuck to the DNA. But maybe they're also affecting the water. They're affecting the structure of the water, the highly organized structure of the water. It's like almost like a jigsaw puzzle, a 3D jigsaw puzzle that has to all fit together. And these things will affect the water as well through also what happens with the gut microbes. So chronic disease, we know, is not just our genes then, right? And a part of this article was written in 2012. It looks at the environmental determinants of chronic disease. What in the environment gives us chronic disease? And the interesting thing is that we never talk about this in the medical field. We're not taught about this, and we don't talk about it with our patients. What in the environment causes disease? We just say, well, you've got the disease, bad luck. This is how you treat it with this drug. But in this paper, very fascinating, they quote the WHO, who warns, lovely WHO, warns that chronic non-communicable diseases are rapidly becoming epidemic. And the authors of this study state that the escalating rates of neurocognitive, so that's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, that type of thing, metabolic, autoimmune, cardiovascular diseases cannot be ascribed only to genetics, lifestyle, and nutrition. So there's more to it than that. So what else is there? There is early life and ongoing exposures to bioaccumulated toxicants. So accumulated toxins may also cause chronic disease. They say also, but we have so many toxins in our environment now that when I'm seeing my patients, it appears to me that people are succumbing to the myriad of toxins in our system. And so in thinking about why you get sick, you have to think about the toxins in the environment and the toxins affecting your water and the toxins affecting your gut microbes. Great. So the toxins that are in our environment are key, and we don't talk about the toxins at all. We don't talk about the toxins at all when we consult with our patients. When I used to work in general practice, it was never something that was mentioned. Unless you have an acute poisoning of something, then people aren't going to think that your diabetes is related to the toxins that you've been exposed to in the womb or where you grew up. So what I do with my patients is I ask them, where did you grow up? Where did you live? And some of the interesting things are if they lived near fields that were sprayed with pesticides. That's an interesting one, and there are many studies that show that people that have grown up either near farms that are spraying cattle or spraying crops have a higher incidence of rheumatoid arthritis. Asking what your parents did for a living is also important, because those toxins do get passed to the baby. So, for example, I had a friend who his parents were dentists, and he has a high mercury load. So these are things that we're not taught about at medical school. There aren't any chronic toxin specialists out there. There are acute toxicologists, so if you've got an acute inhalation or acute something poisoning, then there are people that deal with that, but there's no one looking at these really small doses that yes, they would be tested and said, oh no, they're below the level that's going to cause harm. But those levels that you take in, day out, over decades mount up. But also they have a synergistic effect with other toxins, other toxins in the environment, whether that be through the food or through your perfume or through the thing that you wash your hands with, etc. All of these toxins, they work together to create this, what I call toxic inflammatory burden. And that becomes overwhelming over time. And not only does it affect the DNA, as I said, but it's going to also affect your gut. So now that we know that these things are the most important, the gut, the toxins, the water, how do we put it all together? And that's what the next part is how do we view it? Because this is what I really want to get across to people, is how do we view ill health? I want to get away from the car analogy to more of the terrain and looking at how a plant growing in beautiful soil. You're the plant. What's the soil that you grow in? And so this analogy is more looking at, it's called the hierarchy of health, and we're looking at what comes first, which is obviously the toxins, and then building on that. How do we get ill from that? So let's look at that. So let's look at how it all fits together. We need to understand how it all fits together, because when you get ill, you need to know where to start to unpick that illness. And this is represented by my hierarchy of health. So we start with the water. We live in an environment which arguably is filled with water. The air we breathe, our bodies filled with water. And this is you in your DNA, shining brightly in the universe. And this is how it's meant to be, you shining unencumbered in the universe and affecting your environment. And then along come the toxins. And this layer is called the toxins layer. And as we said, the toxins will affect your water, will affect the DNA. Toxins will also affect the gut. And this layer here is the gut layer. Toxins directly affect the gut. And when the gut is sick, that will create inflammation. This layer here is called the inflammation layer. Now, inflammation, if you like, is made up of immunity. Remember the ninja peas, and infection. But add them together and you get inflammation, if you like. So it's the inflammation layer. Inflammation, the body spends its resources trying to deal with inflammation. This is the silent inflammation that we don't know we've got. The body will use up its resources trying to keep that as low as possible. And sometimes it doesn't cope. And this then results in signs which we find in this layer, which is the deficiency layer. Deficiency is deficiencies of, say, vitamin D or thyroid, adrenal glands, antioxidants like vitamin C, magnesium. So this is where, you go to your GP or your nutritional therapist and you say, I'm feeling really tired, and they'll say, okay, let's look at your blood tests, and your hemoglobin's low, you're anemic, or your vitamin D is low, and that's it's the sunshine, you haven't got enough sunshine, take some vitamin D, you'll be fine. They might measure your zinc may be low, things like that. These are signs of your body trying to cope with the layers that have gone before. Now, all of these layers in derangement for long enough will then start affecting what I call the symptom layer. This is where you get symptoms. And those symptoms would be what my profession would diagnose something. So you might get a cancer, or you might get high blood pressure, or you might be overweight, so obese, or you might get osteoporosis, or you might have gastritis or indigestion, acid indigestion, or Alzheimer's disease, diabetes. These are all the diagnoses that my colleagues would give you. I call them symptoms of the stuff that's going on in the layers underneath. Now, the importance of this is that there's nothing wrong with treating the symptoms, but the symptoms are there for a reason. It's not just bad luck. It's not just your genes. They're there because of this cascade that's happening, this whole cascade coming from the toxins, the gut, the inflammation, the deficiency. And so if we start looking at our environment and start looking at the toxins and the gut, so that the body doesn't have to deal with the inflammation, then these should take care of themselves. These outer two layers should start to take care of themselves. And so if you can grasp that we need to focus on these inner two layers, then you've got it. So this, I actually call it the hierarchy of hell, because it's actually preventing you from being the person you're meant to be. And when we take each of those layers and look at them separately, we can look at the toxins. So, for example, mycotoxins, they're mold toxins. And I'm not going to go through them in such detail today. We'll unpack these as the time goes on, as the weeks and the months go by, because I know I'm possibly overloading you already. Toxins, chemical toxins in our environment, heavy metals. MES is mental, emotional, spiritual issues. EMF, electromagnetic frequency. The gut, we said already, sugars, exercise, EMF, nutrients, and our thoughts. Immunity, that red layer, inflammation layer, to do with infections. Cell turnover is tumours or derangement of cell turnovers. It doesn't matter whether it's really inflammation and or derangement in the macrophages. The deficiency there, it can have very many faces: the vitamin D, adrenal, thyroid, Q10, B vitamins, Vit C, and NAC is an antioxidant, which is friends with Vit C. And then the symptoms, as I said, metabolic syndrome is high blood pressure, cholesterol, obesity, can be also the polycystic ovaries, cancers, mind, mood, memory, joint, respiratory system, kidney system, whatever your symptom is. People say, what can you do for this thing? I've got this thing, I can't get it better. Then it's always going to be looking at these layers here. Look at those. If you want a long-term solution, then it's going to be looking at those. And what about the hierarchy of wealth? How do we get better then? We're taking these first few layers as the most important things. We're removing the toxins from our environment and we're healing the gut. These are the most important things. They're so simple, and you don't really need a doctor for this. And so if you can grasp that dealing with these two layers is the most important thing for you to regain your wealth, then you've got it. You've got it. But we can also support the immune system. We can replace deficiency if necessary. And we can target the actual system also if necessary. These are not wrong, but the long-term solution is these two. So that is it in terms of the overview. And what I'm going to be discussing at the subsequent talks will be diet to detox. Diet to detox is about those first two layers, the toxins in the gut. With there's a phase 1 where we remove the toxins and heal the gut. A phase 2 where we begin to increase the amount of fermented foods in our diet to really seal the gut well. We begin to perhaps attach to toxins in that are sitting in our tissues. And phase 3 is where we really go for those toxins and start getting them out of the tissues. But we can only start removing the toxins when these two phases are good. And what about the water? So we talked about all of this, but we can't forget the water. We can't forget our DNA's water. We have to deal with that as well. And I'm going to be talking about water on a very specific session all of its own. So this is the summary. This is what you need to take home is this is you with your DNA shining brightly in the universe, and the toxins and the gut layer are the most important two layers. So why do we get ill? It's going to be about those toxins, the gut, and of course the water. Great, I hope that made sense. And so that's really an overview of why we get sick. And what I'm hoping for from here on in then is to unpick that. So we look at the diet to detox phase 1, 2, 3. I'll look at toxins and really the role that the specific toxins and where we're getting them from. That's going to be important because you're going to need to identify those in your environment and
think about switching them to alternatives. So so the next phase will be looking at that, looking at toxins. I'll also look at water. I'll look at that between the 1 and 2 phase, where sometimes we give some supplements to gently bind some of those toxins, but enough not to make you too sick. Some of the questions that I've been asked is, what about anxiety and depression? Is that all in the gut? Well, in fact, that's a really good question, because the chemical serotonin that Prozac boosts is 90% made in the gut. And what I find with my patients is that once we start to deal with the gut, even if they come with their knees or what have you, they'll come back and tell me before the knees are better that they're feeling great, that their mood has changed. And so, yes, it's known that a gut-brain axis exists. And when we change the gut, it changes things in the brain as well. So, yes, anything that you can think of in that outer circle, that purple circle, will have a seat in the gut and around that DNA together. Someone's asked me, they've got slime in their neck, so I assume that's mucus. Is that due to inflammation? Yes, it is. So in my the first bit, I talked about the single layer of cells in the colon and how they had mucus on top. Now, that's a normal layer of mucus, but what can happen is if you've got toxins in your system, then the ninja peas, they create more mucus. So that mucus there is a sign that there's inflammation. And then you ask yourself, why is the inflammation there? The inflammation is there because the gut microbes are in trouble. Why are the gut microbes in trouble? Usually because of the toxins and the other stuff, the other toxic stuff that's toxic to the gut microbes. So yes, and then somebody's asked me, how long does it take to get rid of the inflammation? And yes, that's an interesting question as well. And so my patients that come, say, with arthritis, and they've been told that they need an operation. Once we go on the diet to detox and we go through the toxins in the gut and reducing the inflammation, people can start feeling better pain-wise within 2 weeks. And so I've had people say to me who've been ill for 10 years or more that after 2 weeks, they don't have any pain. They may still have the stiffness, but they don't feel they need their operation anymore. So it can be as little as 2 weeks. But then it seems to be that the more sort of different things you have going on, and the longer you've had them going on, the longer it's likely to be for you to get better. So usually people would take those types of people, chronic people that have been ill for 10, 15 years with lots of different things, particularly when there's chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, those are, it's a longer period of time. So it can be anything 3 months to 2 years. And the pathway can be up and down through that. And that's because of, it's like onion skin layers, particularly the gut. And what I surmise, I'm not 100% sure about this, is that as you go on the diet to detox, you begin to take layers, abnormal layers of microbes off. They form biofilms in your gut. And what I see is that people have these peaks where they're unwell when you're going through this system. It's not necessarily that I'm suggesting you take something that makes you unwell. It's actually the withdrawing of the toxins, their food that causes them to die, then creates inflammation that makes you unwell. And sometimes when you try to drawing them out of the tissues also makes you feel unwell. So there's and you have to, each time you feel unwell, particularly if you've got chronic fatigue, you can barely get up in the morning. If you have a backslide there, then that can be difficult to overcome that and even to feel that you're getting better. But that is often the case, and you have to overcome that and then you get a bit better, and then you might have another one, and so it's like that. So that journey can be a long one, and that's why I call it the patient journey, because you need to be patient on that journey. It's not like a drug where you take a drug and then you feel better 4 hours later. Good. So I'm hoping that is a good introduction. What I'm going to do next week is we're going back to practical things, and we're going to be doing batter. I love batter. I grew up living opposite a chip shop in Chesterfield, Station Lane. I'm sure it's still there. So I love batter, and I love to think that I can make it reasonably healthy. And it's not just about having the bugs. I've said that before. It's about understanding that we're living in this increasingly toxic environment. And I've got this book here that, you see it, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. She wrote that it was published in 1962, that book. And when you read it, you just want to cry. Silent Spring, it says it there, where, the birds stopped singing, because they got taken out by toxins. And she talks about different places in America where toxins are released and what happens downstream of that. And she also talks about how it takes a long time for some of the toxins to reach us in the groundwaters. And what we have to understand was that was 1962. Our groundwaters are likely to be well saturated with toxins. So we might be eating organic food, but we can't avoid these toxins in our body care stuff, in our new cars, in our carpets, in our curtains, in our clothes. We can't avoid it. So we have to, going back to batter, we have to try to look at ways of mitigating any toxins that are coming from anywhere. So in our food, if we can ferment our flour, then we are hopefully trying to break down some of the toxins that are in those, so that when we eat that food, then it's not so bad for us. And so if we can get into this idea of fermenting most of our foods, so I talked about fermented protein previously. We're helping our body not only to break down the toxins, but also we are pre-digesting the food, so that actually our bodies don't have to work so hard to digest it, particularly if our bodies have a problem, a gut problem. So we're doing batter. So what I'm going to be doing is different types, same batter, but how can you use different things to ferment the batter? Because people have access to different types of ferment, and what can we use to do that? So a batter to make the batter for fried fish, but also the batter for waffles, and the batter for pancakes, and the batter for donuts, those types of things. So that's what I'm going to be doing next week. So do tune in for that. Hope you enjoyed that. And the week after that, the week after that, I'll be doing, I'm hoping we may have one of the other speakers coming on who's going to be talking about the heart, Dr. Stephen Brooke. He's going to be talking about the subconscious and the heart, and how we can use the heart through techniques, breathing techniques, intentional focus techniques to heal. What I see in patients, a lot of my patients, is that there is often a subconscious issue, and if we can help ourselves to overcome that, then we make a lot faster progress. And so I've asked Dr. Stephen Brooks, who's written a book called My Amazing Heart, to look at serializing his book for us in a practical sense, so that we can engage with him through these practical steps to release our body. So do tune in for those. Look out for those. We've also got Subrachi, who will also be joining us as well. She's developing a set of interactive lectures also that again helps us to become unstuck from our habitual sort of bad habits. She works with troubled teenagers, and she's remarked that troubled teenagers, stuck in those, have become stuck adults. And I think there's part of that in all of us. I'm sure we can all put our hands up and recognise some of those stuck behaviours in all of us. And so hopefully Stephen and Sue Bratchley is going to help us with the subconscious side of things. And I'll help you with the physical side of things and the food side of things. Thank you. Remember, change starts with you. Be well.